Hi, I'm Melinda, and thanks so much for joining me today. I haven't done a video for quite some time. I was traveling a lot. I'm now settled in Portugal and have been for 5.5 years. And I'm wanting to talk today about the new citizenship regulations for Portugal that are being discussed and debated as we speak in early July. It's affecting me greatly as it's affecting many. And I wanted to share a few perspectives, personally from my perspective only, a little bit from what I've heard around the region. I'm not going to address some of the issues that I simply have no understanding of, but I also want to put forward a few solutions and ideas and perspectives that people may find of benefit, and maybe we can talk about those a little bit more. So the process for the video, which may end up going for a little bit of time, so skip into bits that are most of interest, is what I perceive and hear from the local community to be some of the major issues that Portugal is having with immigration and why they are complaining so heavily, and in my opinion, rightfully so, complaining heavily. Things do need to change for sure. I do believe, I'll say right up front, that the suggestions being put forward will not actually resolve those issues. So I want to outline just some of the problems that I have seen. I'm sure there are potentially more. If you are Portuguese, please feel free to comment nicely and kindly and politely of other issues that you see, so that we can all consider those as well and become aware of other things that are coming up for people. I will then talk about why I feel the proposed changes as we are at this stage may or may not resolve those problems and what is actually going on. And I will also put forward some ideas of what I think could work and would actually resolve the issues that are coming up. I'll also potentially talk a little bit more about my own situation after all of that. I think it's actually irrelevant for most people because everybody has a different circumstance, and so why bother? But some people may be interested. So I'll do that at the end, and if people want to stay on for that, then they can do so. So what are some of the main problems that I hear and have heard in the time that I have been here about the problems of immigration into Portugal? First of all, what I hear a lot about is that the immigrants that come here do not integrate. They don't speak the language, and they don't understand the cultural norms and the laws of this country, and are not integrating well. They're staying in groups and packets in various areas of Portugal, and it's causing a problem with regards to integration. I think that's pretty valid, actually, in all areas. The reasons for that may be debatable, but nonetheless, there are some valid concerns about that, and I can see that. Secondly, a major problem that people talk about is that there's wealthier immigrants. They often call themselves expats, which annoys a lot of locals as well, because they're not actually expatriated here for a short period of time. They are actually wanting to immigrate into the country. But because of their relative wealth and the income they're getting from other countries, the prices are going up and being pushed up, so that the locals who are born here and live here and earn income here can't afford housing, can't afford the cost, the ever-increasing cost increases of food and so on. Thirdly, housing, and there's two aspects of that, partially also covered above, is that the housing prices are going up both for rentals and sales, and that's causing the citizens and the locals in this area a lot of problems. They're being pushed out of particularly the city areas, but even into the rural areas. Some feel the need to leave the country, so they say. And also to do with a supposed shortage of housing, and that there isn't simply enough housing to house all of the immigrants coming into the country. Finally, the only other issue that I will be addressing is the illegal immigration issue, that there are people coming in and being snuck into the country illegally and forming their own cultural packs and sticking with those cultures, once again, not integrating, but also obviously not legally paying taxes and doing all the right things. And I've also heard from a lot of locals about the fact that they're getting benefits that is not easily on offer to the locals who are of lower incomes and so forth. Now, for me, just on this latter one, before I talk about it a little bit more and the validity of the regulations for dealing with that, I am a little unsure what people are actually referring to when they talk about illegal immigration and into this country specifically, because from my definition of someone who's illegal is someone who snuck in, is not documented, and is not able legally to be here. In which case, how are they then registering to get benefits from the government? It doesn't make a lot of sense for me. If you've snuck into the country, if you're not legally here, you have to provide quite a bit of documentation, is my understanding. Well, I certainly had to, in order to be able to register for future social security benefits, to register my taxation and so on, and to go and see, go into a hospital to get treated. And, if I want to have a bank account here, lots of things, you have to have applied and put those registrations through government departments. So in order for them to get the benefits, which many people are complaining about, understandably, how are they getting that if they're not even legally here? They wouldn't even have a bank account for the government to pay them into. And even if they're getting the cash payments, which are still possible here, how are they asking for them if they're not even legally here? I think what people mean is that they are legally coming in, but through scammy means. And I think that that's potentially very valid. There seems to be a lot of people who are in working, farming sort of agricultural areas that are bringing big loads of workers in from other countries en masse, and they are coming in based on work permits for a certain amount of time. I've heard that they actually pay those employers to hire them and to bring them in and help them get all these things set up so they can work here. And they work here for 6 or 12 months, just long enough to meet the criteria, and then they go off and do their own thing. I think the same also applies in a lot of mobile phone shops, a lot of restaurants, the bigger name restaurants, and I think there's been raids in, for example, some Chinese shops, Chinese restaurant, I think it was in Lisbon, where they found tens or dozens of people sleeping out the back. So they are given really shoddy accommodation for working. They do work here, and it's all kind of a scammy system to get them into the country. So it's not strictly illegal, potentially, I'm not really sure, but it's certainly scammy and not right, that needs to be addressed. So I think that is what people refer to when they're talking about the illegal immigration, and that is understandable. With the wealthy immigrants coming in, or wealthier immigrants coming in, and they're doing so legally, there is also a lot of complaint that they are also getting benefits, and that is certainly been the case. Some have changed recently, but from what I can see, it hasn't all been scrapped. It's just been changed and maybe a little bit less beneficial, but it's still there. So benefits, for example, like they had the Golden Visa program, where you could buy a home or something. I'm not really up on these programs because they don't apply to me at all. I'm not wealthy. But you could buy a home for 500,000 euros, and then you got benefits of getting automatic residency, and I think even citizenship down the track if you wanted it, without having to go through further hoop jumping. So the requirements and also taxation benefits, that they were able to apply for 10 years. I think it was completely tax-free if they were paying tax in another country. And that is, in my opinion, simply unfair to the locals. If you're living in this country and you're paying tax anyway, it should be the country anywhere. It should be the country that you actually live in. So they got these significant tax benefits. Now, they have been pulled back. I don't know if they've been eliminated altogether, but they have been pulled back to some degree. So there are some valid, in my opinion, some very valid concerns. Other things that this law changes, excuse me, these law changes is to deal with things like birthright citizenship, where people are coming into the country and having a child here quite quickly and then claiming birthright citizenship for the child born here when the parents aren't from here. There's also a lot of immigrants that have left the country. And this is what we need to remember, that a lot of Portuguese over the past 50, 60 years have left the country for a whole variety of reasons that are particularly unknown to me, but they have. And then the parents have gone out, children are born in another country. They seem to have particularly moved to France, Canada, Luxembourg seem to be very common. And now the children of those immigrants to those countries want to come back and claim their citizenship back into Portugal. And I believe someone said, I don't know if it's correct, but someone said something about 70% of the current backlog for citizenship applications was actually from that demographic of people, Portuguese descendant people whose parents had left the country, they were born overseas, but they're claiming citizenship here. And there's also something about Sephardic Jews. Now, I'm not going to talk about any of those latter issues at all because I simply don't understand what was the past regulations on it and what the future ones are. At this time, what happens when you come into the country is you apply for residency, and there's different regulations from different places. I don't claim to know all of those either. I can only talk from my own experience. So I came pre-Brexit. I'm a dual Australian and British citizen, so I came in on my British passport, and I didn't know at that time. Initially, I was travelling as well. I didn't know that I was going to settle here. And so I came in as a European citizen and was just here visiting and then deciding whether I wanted to get residency. And I claimed residency at the end of 2019 once I'd settled in here and continued, but under the old EU system where it was automatic because Britain was part of the EU. So my process in that has been a little bit different. My sons, however, I have an adult son who lived here before me, and he came in based on a working scenario. He had a contract here for 12 months. So he came here on that contract, started working here, got his residency visa. I think from memory and knowledge, it was 1 year. Then he renewed for another 1 year based on still having the contract. Then I think it was, I don't know whether it was another 1 year or 2 years. And then he's been doing it in two-year intervals. And we are both now eligible for the current circumstance of being here for over 5 years as residents and wish to continue. Now, me as an EU, and as far as I know that my son from being from Australia, I don't think my son had to provide any criminal record check to enter the country. That may be different for other countries, but I don't think that he had to. I certainly didn't have to. And I had to show that I had some money in the bank to support me for a couple of years, the average income for a couple of years, or that I had regular income. He, of course, had a work contract here. So that's kind of how it stood up until now for the areas that I'm familiar with. And then after 5 years, as long as you had done nothing illegal here, you could apply for citizenship. And the current circumstance and conditions around that is that you've lived here continuously for 5.5 years, 5 or more years, that you haven't left the country in intervals longer than 3-month intervals. And I think it was probably a maximum of 2 years in total over the 5-year period. And that you have A2 proficiency in the language and can prove it either with a test or a certificate from where you've learnt that. And you have to provide documentation, obviously identity documentation, and you have to provide a criminal check from any country that you resided in the years prior to coming to Portugal. So I decided this year, having lived in another location, I moved to a great town, am enjoying it here, and decided, yes, I would apply for citizenship before there was any discussion that I was aware of that they were going to change the regulations. But it takes some time. It took me months and cost a lot of money for me to apply to Australia to get various legal documents, birth certificate, marriage, divorce, those sorts of things, and the criminal record check. I have been enrolled in my language course, and that I completed that. I think it was around the first week of May, and it took until mid-June for them to issue that certificate for me to be able to prove that I had completed my A2 certification in the language. So gradually, and then you have to get them all translated and documented here. So I was due to lodge my documentation literally this week, and I haven't been able to do so, and it's really devastated me. And I'll go down to that more at the end if anyone's interested in hearing that story. So that is what is currently required to get your citizenship here. It's relatively easy if you've been here for 5 years as a resident. So what I am concerned about with these changes is not that changes may not be needed. I think there are some changes needed in the whole process, let alone the bureaucratic waiting periods and nightmare of doing it, but in actual what is legally allowed and not allowed. And what they are suggesting for me, there's different regulations for people who are from Portuguese-speaking countries and so on. But for me, is that I basically have to do all the same similar conditions, but after 10 years of being here. And also that I may need to have a higher level of language than just A2, and that I may need to show more knowledge of integration into the community and more cultural knowledge and background of the country. I don't have a problem with actually most of that. It's just that the way that it's being done. And one of the key issues too is that if I'd have applied for citizenship, which I wasn't able to do this week, we're talking a 2 to 4 year period for the very slow-moving bureaucratic process of Portugal to process those applications and to be approved. So yes, while I've been here for 5.5 years and may put in an application, it's probably 7.5 to 9.5 years before I find out the outcome of that and actually get confirmed as a citizen. If you're pushing it out to 10 years, you're asking people who genuinely want to be here and integrate into the country to live with an uncertainty for 12, 14, 15 years before they get their approvals through of knowing that they are secure here. Now, for me personally, I'm not in my 20s. I'm a bit older than that, so quite a bit. And so that means that it's pushing my security and safety and a real comfort that, yes, I can just sit in here and become part of the community and enjoy my life here, knowing that I'm part of this community for much, much longer. And if for whatever reason, I can't imagine what, they reject me, I've now waited out 12, 14, 15 years in a country for citizenship and then have to potentially start all over again or just remain as a residency with a little bit less security after that. And by that, I will be well into my 60s, and that is a very uncomfortable prospect for me. So let me talk first of all about why I think these laws are not effective, because it doesn't actually resolve the issues and the problems that people are saying that they are having, in my opinion. So first of all, about immigrants not integrating into the country. Does making the time 10 years instead of 5 address that issue? No, in my opinion. In fact, it makes it worse. Surely if you want people to be part of the community and integrating and learning the language, you want them to do it as quickly as possible. So what it means is that instead of getting testing at the 5-year mark and having to provide that, we're now having to do it at the 10-year mark, which means that people are living here for another 5 years without having that integration. So it doesn't resolve that issue. It actually pushes it out even longer. I'm just checking my notes here, sorry, so I'm just making sure. Also, if there is more of a feeling of uncertainty for me and for others, that am I going to be allowed to stay, not allowed to stay, it doesn't give you the comfort just to settle in and build infrastructure here. If I wanted to start a business here, and many people do, if I wanted to extend my home, do things that and volunteer in communities, put my time and energy into communities, I want to do that because I'm entrenched into those for the remainder of my life, and I'm investing all of my financial resources here. People are far less likely to want to do that if there is a risk that that'll all get ripped away from them down the track. And they have this level of uncertainty of, well, what if I have to uproot and go somewhere else and find somewhere else to live because of this uncertainty of our citizenship? The reality is that if the citizenship does not get approved, I can remain here as a resident. And in terms of the functionality of life here, there's really no great difference to my life here. And there's no difference that I can see on how that impacts the local community at all. It doesn't give them any extra benefit having me here just as a resident or as a citizen. In fact, I think the local community benefit far more by having me as a citizen. I've committed to the country, I've passed the test, I've provably integrated more. And the quicker we can do that, the better it is for the local community to feel that we are here for life and not just a visitor using their country. So I don't understand how that stretches out. In terms of the language, again, I think it's much more beneficial to have people at a higher level of language. And I will talk about my solutions, what I think should happen there. But again, having that tested out at the 10-year mark means that people can be here for 10 years without knowing the language instead of 5, or understanding the culture or the laws and so on. It simply pushes the problem out further and actually makes it worse for the local community. In terms of wealthier immigrants coming here, that the problem of that and gentrifying the country, pushing the pricing up of everything and being quite elitist in their style, I haven't seen, maybe I'm wrong, there's any provisions in these law changes in terms of citizenship that they're actually changing any of that. They're not cutting the benefits any further to wealthier people being here. In fact, they seem to have a fast-track system into the country just as much, if not more. So that's not going to resolve that issue. Wealthier immigrants can still live here as residents. We can still buy housing here. So it doesn't seem to resolve that at all. I don't see that it does anything. And in fact, if they are giving incentives to wealthier people to be here to get easier routes to citizenship, and that still remains, I'm not sure if it does or will, then they're actually more incentivized to spend their money and throw their money around, and you're attracting in those very wealthy people who are gentrifying the nation instead of those in a working capacity who are here to work. And I'm generalizing here. There's obviously big crossovers, but those that are of a more middle class who are working here alongside the Portuguese. I just don't see that they're offering any benefit and change in that. Also, if residents remain as residents, wealthier people remain as residents and don't do their citizenship, they may be viewing the place as more short-term and they don't care as much about the impact on the local community. I think that there is a care factor that's much higher for the local community, for the country. If you are now voting in the country, if you're a citizen and you're here you've committed to the country via citizenship. And so I think if anything, it just makes it worse. At best, makes no difference whatsoever. Connected to that, and the next problem was about the housing. And yes, the prices of housing, as I said, absolutely makes no difference whatsoever. I want to say just this, which I'm sure may annoy a lot of Portuguese. In terms of the pricing, what frustrates me with this whole conversation is that the immigrants don't set the pricing. The locals set the pricing. And if the house pricing is going up, it's because the locals are making the most of opportunities to them to push the pricing up to get the maximum that they possibly can. Now, I understand that rationale. I'd want to make as much money and profit on my rentals or my housing as I could if I was a local here of a property boom. I understand that. But that's a decision that's being made by the Portuguese people. As immigrants, we don't want to pay high amounts. We would rather pay as little as possible. So there's nothing really that the immigrations are doing that, except that they simply have the capacity to pay. The other part of this is supposed housing shortage. And I'm still trying to get my head around this because I don't understand that there is a housing shortage. I think there's a housing availability issue. Now, there's potentially a lot of reasons for that I won't go into here. But from what I've looked at, the population has remained relatively the same with a small increase recently. Over the past 50 odd years, especially the last 20, you have a lot of people in Portugal who not just recently, not just due to the immigration boom, but through lifestyle issues and potentially Salazar prior to that, left the country. Millions and millions of Portuguese currently live outside of the country. If there was not immigration, then the population would have dropped down a couple of million people. So now we have immigrants that have come in. So if we've always been able to house around 10 million people, give or take a few 100,000, then the houses are here for that amount of people. They were housing 10 million people in around about 2000. They're still housing around 10 million people now. The problem is that the housing is not available. And anyone will tell you that if you go into country towns outside of summer, some of them are ghost towns. There's all these houses that are there, they're locked up. So what I think is causing that is that the local community with housing here have left the country. They often keep their housing either through emotional reasons, it's been owned by great-grandma, grandma, parents, family homes, and or because they want to come back in the summer holidays and visit here, so they use it then, and or because the taxation laws are very problematic here, in my opinion, in terms of capital gains tax and so on. And people don't want to sell their housing. It's a burden on them, and they may want to come back to it one day in future. But also there's a taxation issue with regards to selling of homes. There's also a taxation issue with regards to renting out housing, and the taxation here for people who are mid to higher income earners, actually for everybody, I think is exceptionally high. So people are not utilising those housing. They're just going, we're just going to leave them sit there empty. So the housing shortage is because those who own them have left the country. The people coming in don't have them, and they've got nothing to access. So citizenship or no citizenship over a certain period of time is not going to resolve that issue. Taxation, financial, economic, and issues are going to have more of a factor into that. Citizenship, again, is simply not going to resolve that issue. What was the other issue with regards to that? I think that's the main thing. With regards to illegal immigrants, again, if people are illegal, fully illegal, they haven't even applied for residency. They're certainly not applying for citizenship, so this doesn't affect them at all. Similarly, people who are coming in through dodgy means to get here and to do something scammy to get into the country, the reality is they are in the country, they have got their residency, and so they can go through the process, and extending that process does make it longer for them, but they can still stay here as residents and work and do everything anyway. So it doesn't fully address that issue either. However, the only thing that I see that this moving from 5 years out to 10 does change, and I understand why it's a valid concern and that does need addressing, is that some people are using Portugal as an easy stop-off point to get an EU passport for use either to go and live in another EU country or to allow them to travel the world more easily as an EU passport holder. That's a valid thing to be addressed, and I think it can be addressed, but in a different way. And so people, because a lot of the other EU countries have harsher citizenship requirements and a 10-year period, people are coming here, doing it faster, and then once they've got that, moving to another country or doing other things with those EU passports. That is the only aspect of all of this that I think is valid with the 10-year period, and I think it can be addressed another way, because there is a small group of people potentially who are doing that, but what these changes are doing is scooping up a whole heap of people in that, which is just causing a lot of heartache and causing other problems and not addressing that issue. So in short, in summary, I think that this has been a knee-jerk political reaction. There is a big uprising right now in Chega, in right-leaning parties of varying kinds. This is the same across the world, in my opinion, from what I've seen, and potentially rightly so. And there are concerns about the rates of immigration and the integration of immigrants into the countries. And Chega got such a big uprise over the past 5 to 6 years. They need to be listened to. There's obviously a massive localized sentiment, and I hear it every day as well, against immigration. And it frankly, it hurts as an immigrant because you feel that you're being targeted too. And so I understand that, and that is a valid concern that needs to be addressed. However, it seems to be a political knee-jerk reaction. Instead of going, this is the whole package of what we can do to actually address the problems and concerns, as I've just run through, this is not addressing most of the problems and concerns. It's actually not dealing with those issues at hand, and therefore it's just inconveniencing a lot of people. The other thing that Portugal, in my experience, seems to do, and I think the locals will agree with me, is their bureaucratic process is onerous and difficult and slow and inefficient, and they're not prepared. And a lot of people have said to me, they feel that Portugal moves very slowly with their laws. I actually don't think that's correct. In what I've seen, they move quite quickly with bringing the law in, but they don't actually give consideration to how they're going to implement and control that law and monitor that law. An example of that is when they decided to get rid of CEF, the immigration department that was a few years ago, through problems with that department. And they did so, but then they hadn't set up the new department to take over from it. And so there's this massive backlog with paperwork from, I don't know, I think it was 1 or 2 years that the new department was not set up properly and still isn't running effectively in order to take over from that department. Similarly, they're talking about bringing in these new laws. Even while they're talking about the laws, they're stopping the processes, the ones that have always been in place. I went to use them this week and was told I could no longer do so. And they've just stopped it while they wait. I assume it's just while they wait and see what happens, which means it's going to be even more of a backlog in 3 months' time if they allow us to go through and do these things. Everything's in limbo land, and they haven't thought about how are they going to implement these, what staff do we need to hire to do this, and what's going to be the new process before they pass the law. And the law, instead of saying, maybe they will, I think it's unlikely, instead of saying, okay, this is the new law and it's going to be effective from the 1st of January next year, and these are the departments we're putting into place. In that time, we're going to hire staff, we're going to do this from this time, everything runs as normal up to there. What they will do, I would imagine, is just saying it's effective now, and nothing is in place to handle it. And this makes for huge chaos and huge backlogs and huge problems for everybody, citizens that are local born, as well as those of us trying to get in, huge amounts of stress, and adds to the stress and trauma to those of us who are trying to apply in this degree of uncertainty. And I will talk later, it's extremely stressful. So, in my humble opinion, what do I think are possible solutions? I'm just going to shuffle paper around, sorry if there's a little bit of noise. I haven't got all the solutions for all of the problems, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong in this, and I'd love some Portuguese people's feedback on this and other people applying for citizenships. But I see that there are some things that they could do to fix things much more effectively and efficiently, and not put it in so much trauma, and get more of the results, importantly, more of the results that the Portuguese people actually want and resolve those issues. So this would be my solution for those sorts of citizenship applications that are like me, people who have come from the more westernized cultures, the non-Portuguese speaking countries, and regular citizenship applications, not descendant ones, not birthrights, not Sephardic Jews. I know nothing about those. So I would suggest that Portugal sticks with their current residency conditions and terms, So you can get into the country fairly easily as a resident, and be here for, let's say, for example, 2 years. 1 year can be a little bit short for further considerations for reasons I'll explain in a minute. But let's say 2 years, open to change on that. The first year that you come into a new country, if you're actually looking to live here as opposed to just being on holiday or checking it out for 3 or 6 months, it's very stressful. It requires you to, for me, drive on the wrong side of the road, learn all about new road rules. Who do I even talk to about connecting electricity? How does that work? I don't speak the language. I'm trying to navigate all of that. I don't understand the cultural norms. I don't know whether I'm being polite in referring to someone as senora or donna. I am trying to pick up basic things. I'm away from my family. I'm away from my friends. All of these things are very stressful, apart from the normal stresses of just moving house, moving into a different part of the world, getting used to a new climate, where things are. Did I move to the right area? So to put a lot of extras into the residence at that time probably won't get the results people want, and it doesn't allow residents to actually settle in and decide if they want to stay here for an extended period of time. If you just add in even more stresses, people are more likely to come in, try it out for a year and go again, which just puts the system under so much pressure for no outcome. So I think keep the residency incoming into the country fairly simple, up to a maximum of 2 years. In my opinion, the government should create a guide booklet to the country that people who apply for residence can purchase. It's not expected they do it for free. Not for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars, but say €50 or something like that immigrants purchase, and they're required to purchase as part of their application fee for residency, outlining, and it could be an online book. It doesn't have to be a hard copy book. It could be an access to a site that they then have permanent access to as part of their registration into the government systems, and so that things can be updated fairly easily in that for the government and the people who are working in that system. But it's an enterprise in itself. It would give them links to services, how and guidelines of how to register with the tax department and so on, all of those sorts of things into services, and the emergency services and health and so on, and also gives an update of some current social norms, and current relevant laws. I'm not talking about a whole legal framework, but maybe an area where they can go and check laws. But I don't think every Portuguese person knows every Portugal law. But the ones that the local community are finding that the immigrants are breaching most often or most confused about, things like the drinking age, whether you're allowed to drink alcohol on the street, the age of consent for sexual relationships, marriage conditions, whether you can extend your house or not. And I'm not talking about a detail of the laws. I'm just saying that it may say, in order to make renovations on your home, you do have to speak to your local camera before you do that. Go talk to them and find out more information, rather than people just assuming they can paint their house or add a window in when in fact they may not be able to. So just some basics, and the cultural norms, that it is a highly Catholic community, that there are community events and you can talk to your Fregzia about those and the religious events in your town and find out more. And we expect you to stick with our cultural norms in those areas. So in that booklet, as well as giving an overview, I think there should be a section on, in the future, in this proposal, they're talking about doing a test at the 10-year mark for people to prove that they have some better knowledge of the cultural regulations and norms. And I agree that that should be the case. I'll talk about it a bit more in the future. But I don't think, personally, I'd see it's completely irrelevant to talk about much in terms of historical events. I know in my home country of Australia, they do that, and they ask questions about cricket. Who cares? None of the locals, except for cricket supporters, no one care about cricket. They talk about kings and queens and all of that sort of stuff. And I just think that's completely irrelevant to the day-to-day life of people here in Portugal. feel free, Portuguese, to correct me if I'm wrong. I do think it's important to know about some of the events that affect here and now. For example, the Salazar period and why some of the things are in place as a throwback and a carry-on from that time. The Carnation Revolution that is celebrated every year on the 25th of April. And so, what does that mean? Because it's happening now and it affects now. So I think that those things are relevant from a historical perspective. But knowing more about the culture and norms and laws relevant to us now should be in this booklet. So we can study it and learn it and get ready for an exam that we may have on it. The thought of having it in 10 years' time is ridiculous for me. If you have someone living here for 10 years, you want them to have known that a long time ago. So I think that guide booklet should be made available. It's a condition upon entry that you buy it or access it, and then you have time to read up on it as you wish in the time. Then for people to remain as residents or citizens, but residents as well, beyond 2 years. I think that gives people enough time to have settled in. I think it's unreasonable within 2 years to have a good grasp of the knowledge or even A2 level language. And I know that some people pick up languages really quickly. I'm not one of them. And I know it may seem that you should know some basics within 2 years, and I'm sure you do know the basics of bon dia, obrigado, and some basics of those things. But beyond that, in a stressful period of your life, it is difficult to learn more than that. But I think within 2 years, you should be showing a willingness to do so. So I think to remain after 2 years, the person needs to either A, do a test or provide certification to say they have done their A1 and A2 certificate, or that they are enrolled in the course to do it. And so that is underway for those people. I think it is reasonable at the 2 year mark that the people pass that cultural legal information test based on information that was in their guiding booklet that they were given upon residency, because we don't want people to be testing out on that after 10 years. We want them, if they're feeling that they're going to settle here, after 2 years, you've got a pretty good idea of whether you do want to stay here full time and either do residency or citizenship. Shouldn't matter. You can continue doing residency without citizenship anyway, and we want those people to have a cultural integration as well. So I think it should be on the more basic, currently applicable information of culture and norms, and things like whānau and things that we see on an everyday basis. In addition, and the criminal record check. So a criminal record check is only required, to my knowledge, certainly for me, once you are applying for citizenship. But don't we want our residents? Don't you want your to know that your residents aren't criminals in another country too? Why is this not done in residency? It may or may not be at the time of entry residency. I don't know. But certainly within 2 years, once someone said, yes, we're going to stay here, you want to know they're not a criminal. So at the 2 year mark, they need to provide you with a criminal record check of previous countries of residence. So if they've done all of that, then I think we should allow citizenship, sorry for the paper crumpling, at the 5 year mark, not the 10. Keeping in mind that unless something dramatically changes, we're also still looking at another 2 to 4 year processing period after that. So we also, the only other things that I think should come in at the time the person wants to apply for citizenship, I think there is some valid argument, I stress to say with a little bit of intrepidation because I'm guilty of it, of having a higher level of language proficiency than A2. So maybe it's a B2 proficiency to apply for citizenship. You can stay on as a resident with A2. But if you want to apply for citizenship, you maybe have to show that you have completed a B2 course or test out at B2. I don't think that's unreasonable. And of course, the person, if they're not ready at the 5 year mark, they don't have to apply for citizenship straight away. They can apply at 6 years, 7 years, 8 years, 9 years, any time after, once they are ready to have that. Maybe debatable for me whether they need a little bit higher knowledge of cultural norms. I personally don't think it's necessary if you've already passed a test a few years earlier on. And I just want to touch a little bit on the language because I know that this is a sore point and I think it's completely valid. that the locals are very angry that so many people live here and don't learn the language. I have tried so much, and I will talk about this a little bit more about my circumstances in a moment. But what I would just ask the locals to consider, when you learnt Portuguese as a child living in Portugal, you were completely immersed in the language and the culture in your household. And even still, after 2 years of studying that day in, day out, every single moment of the day with Portuguese being spoken around you, a 2-year-old only speaks basic words and short phrase sentences. By 5 years old, after 5 years of being in the language, they're still doing fairly simple sentences and not talking about complex issues at 5 years old in terms of the fluency of the language, with rare exceptions. And that's with complete immersion. When people come into this country, many of us aren't in a workplace or a situation we're in complete immersion, and it's much more difficult for us to, I try to go to coffee shops every day and talk the language, but it's 10 or 15 minutes and it's a very stilted short sentence conversation because the other people don't know English, I don't know enough Portuguese, and so I'm still saying small sentences about everyday things, and I still have a great deal of difficulty. I went into a hardware yesterday and, forgetting that I didn't know the language as well as I would like, went up to ask for a part that could adapt a water pipe on a water tank and make it into a tap, and I know the words for water tank and the tap, and then I need something to do an adaptation. But do you think I could figure out how to describe this in Portuguese? It's a complex topic and sentence. Same when you go in and talk tax issues or social security or medical health issues. They're much more complex. And we don't say to a 5-year-old, do you think your liver is doing this, or it described to me? We just say, where does it hurt? And for many of us, we can say it hurts here in Portuguese. But when a doctor starts talking to us about the complexity of a medical issue and health stuff, we don't understand because we simply don't know that complexity of the language. So please be kind and understand that the grammar and getting the sentencing right and the phrasing right takes Portuguese people through their whole primary and high school period. You're still learning grammar when you're going through, to the final years of 12 years of schooling. So, by this time, children are 15, 16, 17, 18 years old. We're not going to get there within 2 to 5 years. We're doing our best. So please understand that is a barrier to having such a high expectation over the language, and it doesn't make us bad people as long as we are trying to integrate. So I would suggest that after 5 years to at least have enrolled in a B2 course or be tested out at that level is not unreasonable. Now, what this means is that people are then more committed to the country faster. They're more integrated into the country faster. They're doing more in working towards settling in here and being permanently here. And it makes actually no difference in terms of the house pricing or illegal immigration or those other issues that have come up for people. The only thing that I see that system does not resolve or does not help is the situation where people are using this as a stop-off country to come in, spend 5 years in here as a quick fix, and then use it for the rest of Europe. Now, I'm not exactly sure the best wording or way to do this, but my suggestion would be it's a conditional citizenship after 5 years for the next 5 years. I think that people who are registered as a citizen after the 5 years should be allowed to do everything that a normal citizen would do, except for go and live in another EU country and set up residence in another EU country. And use that as their gateway. And if they do, they rescind their Portuguese passport and they have to start all over again. I think that would resolve the issue. I don't know whether that is every issue, whether it's just about people moving to another Portuguese country, to another EU country. using a gateway in via a Portuguese passport. I don't know whether having a business in another country is also an issue, whether that would resolve that. But surely there can be some conditions put in place around where you can have businesses and where you can live until you've gone the 10-year mark in total with your residency time here in Portugal. I don't think it's reasonable to fetter travel. I think as a resident, and it's one of my issues, you can only do 3-month blocks of travel. And I think once you've got your 5-year passport and citizenship in Portugal, I think you should be allowed to freely travel as long out of the country as you can if you're a normal citizen. I don't think there's any use in restricting that because, people do want to travel, especially as they get older. They want to go on long cruises. They want to go back to their origin country and spend time with their families. And they're still a loving citizen and paying taxes and resident in Portugal, or the digital nomads that have got a job elsewhere and all of those sorts of things, or a project that they have to go and do in another country that still makes them a resident here. And I don't think they should be restricted in that, but they shouldn't be using it as a gateway into other EU countries. But I think that can be achieved by allowing still a 5-year citizenship application and the only condition on that is something around using it to then reside in other EU countries. You should not be able to do that until you've passed the 10-year mark, and then it's a full citizenship. So that is my suggested solutions. So if that's enough for you, this has already gone a very long time. Thank you very much for listening to all of that. I just wanted to give a little bit of context. I don't want to talk a lot about my personal circumstance, but particularly for those who are very supportive from the Portuguese citizenship community, Portugal local-born citizens community that are very angry and upset with us immigrants and really want this to change, and maybe feeling that I'm being unfair in suggesting that we shouldn't change it or whatever, and angry at me and everybody else. I just wanted to explain a little bit of my circumstance to hopefully garner a little bit of empathy and understanding from our perspective as well, and also to show other people in the country that, you're not alone. It's tough. It's been really tough. So when I first came here, as I said, I came in before Brexit and didn't know whether I wanted to live here or not. My son was already living here as an adult, and so I knew I wanted to be nearby him, but I was checking out Spain and Italy and all of Europe and just trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I did decide then to continue to travel around and check this country out, stay here a little bit longer, but I wanted to buy something so I had a little bit of security here, and so that when I visited my son, I had somewhere to stay and came. And so I got a very modest little place. A few weeks after I got that, and the place that I got didn't even have a shower, I managed to get that put in quickly, thankfully, and a hot water system, and then we went into COVID lockdown. Now, I come in under very modest means. I was planning to come in and, potentially work if I did stay here. I had it planned to continue doing what I was doing before, which was house and pet sitting and traveling, but using this as a base and looking that if it suited me, I would stay here and set up residency/citizenship down the track. And I looked into the citizenship provisions and went, yes, this will work for me. I can do this. I don't need 500,000 euros. I'm not one of those wealthy people that are going to push up all the housing. And so, I can do this. This will work for me. COVID lockdown happened and I got stuck here, and it was horrible. It was just horrible. I have to say, just going back a little bit further in terms of the language, when I got here, I'd been here on and off through end of 2018, 2019. When I actually moved into the country, end of 2019, I was in a different location, and I went, do I want to be here? The first thing I did was went to the local school and enrolled in a language course, A1, A2. And the only reason that stopped was it was difficult to get there till midnight, which is what they wanted. And then I moved out of that area for other reasons, and so therefore had to stop. So once I moved into the new area, bought myself a little place on the south of Lisbon, first thing I did was went down and enrolled at the school. They told me there was a big waiting list. They didn't know whether I could get in, but let's get in, because I'm a very social, chatty person. And the last thing that I want is not to be able to get to know the neighbours. I moved into an area that didn't have a lot of immigrants there, certainly not a lot of English-speaking immigrants, so that I could force myself into the local community, get to know the community, and not be one of those immigrants who sat in a bubble over here, enrolled in the language. Of course, COVID happened. No lessons happened. I wasn't struck with many funds, and all of a sudden being stuck in a place and not being able to do the thing that I had done before, my funds were exceptionally limited, and I was very worried about spending money on anything and everything, including language courses. I did, however, do some language exchange as much as I could online with people, and paid for some small courses trying to learn. But the reality is, for me, I'm not great at languages. It's not my skill set, and I really struggle to learn. And it is very difficult if you're not immersed. Well, I was sitting in a bubble in a house most of that year by myself. I did not see human life. People understandably were fearful of immigrants, people they didn't know. They were already having to keep distance from the people they did know. They certainly weren't coming up randomly and chatting to me. And it wasn't a particularly friendly area that I was in. I stayed there for nearly 4 years, and basically I did not know anybody except for a passing hello during that time until I left. And it was so difficult to learn the language, and I was isolated, and it was horrible. I just went, what am I even doing here? But there was something about the country that I wanted to check out more. I since moved. October last year, I moved into an amazing country town. It's beautiful. The people are so friendly and so kind. And I do have a little bit of the basics. And again, before I even moved here, once I knew that I had a contract on a home, the first thing I did was went down to the school and registered for my A1, A2 course, which started at the end of September last year. Actually, first week of October, before I'd even moved here. So I was trying to drive from a 2-hour drive here to make sure that I was moving house. I was trying to bring things up here and trying to attend the first week or two of Portuguese lessons, just so that I wouldn't miss the opportunity to come. And you cannot pass if you miss more than 10% of the courses. So I was going to my language lessons. I was moving up here and going, what am I doing? Is this actually worth it? And I've come into this town, and the people are so kind, and I've made a very big effort to go. I went around all of the cafes and introduced myself and told them I'm trying to learn Portuguese. Please only speak to me in Portuguese, but be patient with me. I've gone and spoken to people sitting in the cafes and said, no, don't speak to me in English, please, please. And I asked them to help me. And my Portuguese has come along a lot. I've since got my A2. It's come along a lot. And I've gone, I think this could be somewhere where I can live. And I've now been here the period of time. And so I decided at the beginning of the year that I would go through the process to apply for citizenship. It takes months and quite a bit of money for me to get the documents that I needed out of Australia, because I'm no longer there. I don't have the documents and identification from that country to easily apply for things. I got them all here. I had to wait for my A2 certificate to come in and my police check, which only happened a couple of weeks ago. Then I had to get those documents translated into the notarized translation into Portuguese, which cost me more money and more time. And by this time, the drums were beating very heavily that they were going to change the rules. And I was trying to scramble around to find out whether it was worth continuing to spend the money. I went into a IRN office on the Monday near me because I'd heard that they will actually, it's very difficult to get information about where you can actually lodge these documents, and it seems to change week by week. Officers that I told wouldn't take them now do, and so on. And I'd now heard that this office would take them. So I walked in on the Monday and asked them, will you take my citizenship application here? They said, yes, you push this button, this is applied, da-da-da. I had before I could do that, I needed to get my documents apostilled at the Australian consulate. So I had an appointment, but of course, when you make those appointments, they can be weeks in advance. So I was waiting on that and deciding whether to cancel it or not, but I went ahead with it. So I went down to Lisbon on the Wednesday after confirming that I could lodge my documents, and spent hundreds of euros getting my documents apostilled with the consulate and all my translated documents, everything. On the Thursday, I walked into that office and there's signs everywhere saying we are not taking applications here any longer. You can have an appointment for information only, but we can't take your documents. I didn't know whether that was this office issue or a Portugal-wide issue. So I waited for my appointment. I'd already waited an hour or so outside the office. I waited several hours inside to try and speak to someone. And long story that I don't need to bore you with, but basically outcome that they have told us is that the whole of Portugal, the offices will no longer accept our applications. We have two options that we can still do, but they don't know the outcome. One is we can send all of our original documents in the mail and apply that way. We just need the application form signed off by a solicitor. More money, more time, but send it off. Or we can apply online via a solicitor. The first option doesn't suit me very well because I've just spent so much time and money getting my documents out of Australia. And if I post them in, they could go missing. I don't know if they're going to get returned to me or when. And I still need those documents, the originals and copies of those documents for myself in the meantime for other reasons. So I didn't want to post them in. To go through a solicitor, I haven't really got the money. I know that they charge a lot of money in the first place, but also now that they know that we have to go through them, probably they're all going to push the prices up and they're all going to be really busy anyway. But nonetheless, I went, let's just find out. So I immediately emailed and contacted a couple of different solicitors that I knew to say, everything is ready. I was ready to walk it in. All you just need to do is fill out the form for me. Can you do it? And to date, no one has answered. One lady said she couldn't, but she knew someone who may be able to. So I sent off to them. Everybody else hasn't answered me. So I don't know what the cost involved in that. I don't know whether I can do it. And I'm just sitting in limbo land. And, I'm pretty devastated. I have to say I'm pretty devastated because for me there is so much uncertainty. Here's me going, I'm in a bind now. I did the thing that everybody wanted me to do and tried to integrate and settle into this country. So by buying a property here, I've sunk my funds into that. This property is just a little house, but it's all that I have. And if it turns out that I get rejected for citizenship and I have to go somewhere else, it's not really going to give me the funds I certainly can't go back to Australia because things have gone up. I spent the excess money that I could have bought a house with in Australia trying to live over the past 4 or 5 years here through a COVID difficult situation. So I'm like, okay, what am I going to do? And I'm in my late 50s. So if I have to wait another 5 years before I can even apply, 10 years by the time the process, I'm going to be late 60s. And it's like, wow. I've wasted a lot of my life waiting if they're going to reject me. And it makes it very late in my life to go and find other alternatives somewhere else that I don't even know where I want to be. And my son's here and I want to be here. It's really unsettling. And the thing that from a perspective of the Portuguese, people I can stay here as a resident and you guys wouldn't know. So there's no benefit for you in not having me as a citizen. In fact, I can contribute more to the community being a citizen. So why wouldn't you want me here as a citizen rather than just a resident? But for me, the uncertainty is huge and it's really unsettling and it's really distressing because I don't know where my future lies. I am an entrepreneurial person. I would normally be looking to what can I set up here? And now I'm like, well, do I? What if I put more money into something here? And then I'm told no. And I have to make a decision to go somewhere else. And now I've used more funds or I've set up systems in here for years that aren't going to work in another country. What am I going to do? It's just really unsettling. The other thing that's a problem is that as a resident, I can only be out of the country for a 3-month block or else I lose my residency. And I think it's up to a total of 6 months in a year. I'm not sure how often you can do that over a 5-year period, but it's limited. Now, that sounds like a lot, but I'm from Australia and I'm not 20 that might just want to do a quick trip, If I go back to Australia, I still have brothers and sisters and nephews and nieces there, and it's a long way to go. And, there's other parts of Australia that I'd like to holiday to and see. If I'm going to go back, I am going to want to go back for 3, 4, 5, 6 months. I have older brothers and sisters who may need my help to be cared for as they get a little bit older. I'd like the opportunity to be able to do that and not thinking I've got to get back to Portugal because da-da-da. And rightfully after my 60s, maybe in late 60s, if I've got the money, if I was going to go all of that way, I'd want to go, well, I've always wanted to see Fiji. I'll do that on the way back. So that's one issue that's a bit of a first world problem issue, but one thing that, I'd like to be able to work in with my own family in Australia and be able to be out of the country without stressing about it. The big issue with that for me is things like COVID. We've now seen what can happen in a time like COVID, and it may not be another COVID. It could be a disease. It could be a hard earthquake. It may be a war. It could be any one of a gazillion world emergency situations that may come up, where I may have gone for a 2-week holiday to Spain or Greece or Thailand or wherever. I've just gone on holiday and got out of the country. Now, I know during COVID times that there are friends of mine who are citizens of Australia but were residents in other countries and had been for decades and decades, and had houses there and everything, who left not in Portugal but other places, and they'd gone on a holiday, got stuck out of the country during COVID, were not allowed back into the country because they weren't citizens. And that extended, while they argued that point, for about a year, and they're stuck in a motel room for a year in a foreign country. And then at the end of the day, it was ruled that they had to go back to Australia as citizens of Australia. They weren't allowed back into their resident country. So we know that this can happen. Recent history, I wouldn't have even thought about it 10 years ago, but recent history has shown that this can be a problem, that I could go out on a holiday and always be watching over my shoulder if there's anything hitting the news, that maybe everything that I own, everything that I have, that I've tried to invest my livelihood and self into and being in this country and setting up in this country, could be here, and I get told I have to go back to Australia because I'm a citizen there. And it's really distressing. It's really concerning. It's hitting me hard. Maybe because it's just all right in the air now and I still have no security over anything. But it's distressing. And it's, of course, distressing for any of us to feel that we're unwelcome here. And the Portuguese people have been very kind in this region for me, for sure. But I also feel the anger. I understand the anger. I get it. And when people have said to me about other immigrants, well, this immigration problem is a real problem, and they're really upset and angry. And I feel it. And I feel bad that I'm part of that problem for other people. And then I say, but I'm an immigrant too. You're saying that to an immigrant, and they can be really nasty. You're saying it to an immigrant, and they go, oh, not you, not you. But of course, the not you is only because they know me and they like me. But for someone else walking down the street that sees me walking down the street that doesn't know me, that anger is still being directed at me. And I feel it. And this is not a Portugal issue. This is a worldwide issue right now. There's anger towards the immigrants of a country, and everybody's being caught up in it. And we're being caught up in so much hatred and division. The big thing that I see is that in all of this, that hatred and anger and division is being stoked, and the solutions suggested are knee-jerk reactions that are not actually resolving the issues of the Portuguese. And I think that's the same potentially in other countries as well. Illegal immigration, certainly. Let's get on to that. It's illegal. They shouldn't just be here, deal with it, move them on, whatever. Get better at bringing the processes in and having the infrastructure to handle those processes, and then be welcoming to the immigrants that are coming in via that system. If you want to put a quota on and say we'll only accept so many thousand per year, then do that. Not retrospectively, though, from here forward. do that if that's what you feel. If you feel there's too many immigrants. In Portugal, it's kind of debatable, though, because so many have left that if you didn't have the immigrants, the population would be declining and you wouldn't have many of the infrastructure that you need to do a lot of the things that you need. And there is some debate over why they leave. Certainly some are saying they have to leave because the economy is so bad and because immigrants are causing all of these problems. But a lot of problems with the economy are being caused by the government and the economy, not by the immigrants. And the immigration out of the country has been big for decades, not just now. So, my suggestion would be, if you want to have a community where you feel good and safe around the immigrant community, the best thing you can do is welcome the immigrant community that are allowed in rightfully, legally, and to work with us. We want to be part of the community. We're trying to be part of the community. Put the limits on as you wish. A certain amount per year is a maximum, I think, would be a very wise thing. Bring in, demand from your government that they bring in assistance, economic assistance to the local citizens. Give local citizens an incentive to stay here, to work here, to run businesses here. Give the incentives to them, not to the immigrants. Give it to the locals to be here. But that's something we have no control over. But if we understand your situation and feeling the anger as a citizen, we can help vote in the right people to do that if that's what you feel will get the results that you want. So I would just say that basically I'm begging for some compassion and for solutions that will actually help you to resolve your problems if you're watching this and you're a Portuguese local-born citizen, and to stop with the knee-jerk reaction. And surely what you want is immigrants alongside you, who are working with you, who are trying to integrate and feel welcome, because we will be much better functioning immigrants here than if we're feeling alienated and hated and shunned to one side. That doesn't bring good results for any country or anything. And I hope that these systems will be resolved in a way that can be more effective for anybody. Anyway, very long video from me, but I hope it gives some insight into my perspective of the current changes to the citizenship laws, the proposed changes. I hope they decide something soon, so that I'm just not sitting in some limbo land of not even knowing whether I should apply or not. It's quite devastating. Have a great day.